Welcome to the GSD with Jenny podcast, where we talk about how to overcome all the stuff that gets in the way of getting shit done. Imposter syndrome, fear, money, relationships, networking, building businesses. We're going to talk to experts, or as I say, mavens, that provide practical and tactical advice on how to GSD. I'm your host, Jenny Buchholz, founder and CEO of Haven Creative. Now, I started my business with $300 in a laptop and grew it to a team of Haven mavens serving clients around the world and generating over 7 figures in revenue. We were named one of the fastest growing companies in Charlotte and 2024 Crowns of Enterprise Woman-Owned Business of the Year, and I'm incredibly proud of the success we've had and to be among the 1% of woman-owned advertising agencies in the country. But I still need help too. So I started this podcast with the intent to dive deeper into the things that hold us back from achieving our goals. So thank you for joining me on this journey to GSD. Let's get started. Welcome to the GSD podcast. I'm excited to have with me today Ryan Sanderson, a former Air National Guard airman, the co-founder of Knowledge Perk, and prominent figure in York County, South Carolina entrepreneurial community, having been named the county's Small Business Person of the Year in 2019. Sanderson's entrepreneurial journey includes a significant role in the startup Spiffy, where he helped expand into new markets and secure substantial funding. He is involved in multiple ventures, including the Gravity Center, a nonprofit supporting early-stage entrepreneurs. Sanderson is dedicated to volunteering, serving on boards such as the Rock Hill Economic Development Corporation, the York County Launchpad, and most recently, EO Charlotte. In his free time, if there is any, he enjoys reading, shooting pool, playing music, and most recently performing in a musical where he had to learn the shuffle. Ryan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Jenny. The bio makes me sound really cool. I'll have to use that as my pump up in the mornings.
You are really cool. So on a personal note, Ryan and I are actually informed together. So we have shared quite the moments of frustration about our entrepreneurial journeys, but I invited him on today because we really want to talk about how we get shit done in times of stress and crisis, or how you raise funding. And I love your enthusiasm and energy around all of those topics. So I want to start with how you kind of got shit done to get to where you are today.
Yeah, I think the thing that comes to the light the easiest and fastest for me is COVID. Just from a business standpoint, we had really just opened our large cafe. We had just taken on fairly substantial funding, substantial for us at that size and that time. And within 6 months of our grand opening of this new beautiful cafe, COVID hit, and we went from a brand new company that had just gone to 23, 24 employees to letting everybody go in a single week. And I remember vividly, completely freaking out, like how are we going to pay rent? How's it going to pay myself? At this point in time, Knowledge Perk was now my only income. And I remember feeling super sorry for myself for about 2 days and just completely freaking out. And then I don't know if it's just the entrepreneurial mindset or the drive, but exactly like you said, get shit done. We had no choice but to just go. And it's like, okay, what do we do? And we started getting really creative and outside, and we had to challenge ourselves and push. We built a drive-through in the middle of the street in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and got permission from the city, literally put up a tent, got walkie-talkies, and we're going outside and letting customers know that they could come through. It would be pouring rain, and I've got a business partner who's 60 years old holding an umbrella, and he's outside holding an umbrella with a walkie-talkie, taking an order from a car that's being relayed into me. I'm now back to full-blown barista mode, on a point of sale, making coffee on an espresso machine, handing it to my third business partner, who is riding back and forth on skateboards because we took all the furniture out and we're trying to get back and forth faster. And we're physically delivering stuff out to a car so they never got out, because it was a workaround not being allowed to have customers inside my physical space because I was retail and restaurant. So that's a little bit of an extreme example, but we did that for weeks. That turned into, we started taking espresso machines to people's neighborhoods. It's like, okay, how do we take stuff to a customer? So we would literally call, this is kind of what I did with Spiffy, we would call an HOA, call an HOA president and get permission to set up in a driveway. literally set up an entire espresso machine and a coffee shop in somebody's driveway, notify the entire neighborhood that we were going to be there, run extension cords into this person's house and give them free coffee for stealing their electricity for 2 hours, and then let every person in the neighborhood come by, and you would literally see whole families in the neighborhood 6 feet apart, standing outside in little family groups, coming through to get their coffee from the coffee shop that we built in a driveway because they couldn't be allowed inside our store.
Wild.
So, I mean, again, some extreme examples, but when you talk about like GSD, like we had bills to pay, we had things to do, and one of my favorite lines is failure is not an option. And there was no opportunity for failure, so we had to do something. That turned into our school buses, and now Knowledge Perk has a fleet of 4 school buses, mostly because we got tired of putting the espresso machine in and out of our car and figured out something else. So I think that's probably my favorite example of like having no idea what to do, freezing for a second, and then realizing that like GSD just kicks in and you've got to go. And however crazy it seems to somebody else is irrelevant, you got to make it happen.
Yeah, you've made several good points in there. It is irrelevant, whatever people think, but what does it take to bust through that failure is not an option? Because a lot of people say fearless leader, and I'm like, I'm afraid all the damn time. It's courage to push through, right? Like, what are those characteristics that you think you have that makes that happen?
That's a great question. I'm a huge fan of dichotomies, and so like being able to have two things that are on opposite sides and be able to put them together at the same time. And so one of my favorite phrases, and I actually maybe it's secret, I've got it on my website. I thought about like trademarking this, but one of the things that I used to use is a necessary fail period. I think every entrepreneur goes through a necessary fail period, and at the same time, I believe that failure is not an option. And so like as an entrepreneur, it's kind of how do you put those two things together? And I think the one is a mindset, the necessary fail period. Every entrepreneur needs to go through a period of time where they're not going to make it. They are going to fail. I've had nonprofits that I started that failed. I've had companies that I started that failed. Each of those failures make me stronger as an entrepreneur, and they do give me the courage to keep going because I've already done it wrong. I've already done it bad. Now I've got the opportunity to go do it right. So I think every entrepreneur needs to have this necessary fail period. It builds character in the entrepreneur, and I think gives you the courage. You can't do worse. You can do better. And at the same time, that mindset also allows me to have the mindset that failure is not an option. Because if I'm going through this process where I feel like I have failed, so let's say I started this nonprofit, it failed, didn't go where it was supposed to. That was part of my necessary fail period. At the same time, the mindset that I have is that I never stopped learning. I never stopped trying. I actually started and helped start another nonprofit. That nonprofit is successful. And we took all the things that we learned from the first one and were able to create it. So yes, I had a period of failure that was necessary. And at the same time, it didn't stop my mindset that failure is not an option. I'm not stopping at that one failure. I'm going to keep going.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
But how do you know when you're in the necessary failure stage? Because sometimes I feel like, damn, I'm failing all the time, just a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And I go through it.
Man, that's a great question because I mean, as entrepreneurs, I think part of what drives us to that success is the feeling in some ways that we are always in that kind of failure mode or in that necessary fail period, and we don't like that.
Yeah.
I know some people that they're okay with that.
Uncomfortable.
Right. And it's like, I want to be uncomfortable. And again, I go back to this
True.
mindset that failure is not an option. So I'm doing everything I can to get out of that fail period. And eventually I do. And we come out on top. So it's a little bit of a mindset shift on both. And it does require, courage. You mentioned the play. The play is a great example. Like I was just in a play. The number one reason that I was in a play is because it absolutely terrifies me.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, right? Like we do shit that scares us. Why?
I think it's to prove that we can GSD. It's to prove that we can overcome our fears, and it's what makes us leaders. It's what makes us successful, or it's what makes us bigger failures than maybe somebody else, because we're willing to do it.
Take the risk.
Yeah. I would almost say like the process of going through this play has been part of my necessary fail period.
Okay.
Because I'm terrified. I love dancing. I think it is the coolest thing in the world. I love watching other people dance. Jenny, I cannot dance at all. Like I
I
can't
mean, you
move.
just learned the shuffle, so I'm going to call
I
bullshit
did
on
learn the
that.
shuffle.
Right,
Well,
right.
and that's where how I put those two things together. That
Oh, yeah,
period
that's right. Your
of time,
dichotomy. I can't
right?
dance, but I love dancing.
Correct. And so during that whole
Yeah.
time, I was failing miserably. When I practiced for weeks and weeks and weeks to get
Yeah.
the shuffle, that whole time I failed miserably. I
Yeah.
would literally stand in front of a mirror, and I had people try to help me, and they're like, "Oh, bro, I don't know if you can do this."
I love it.
I failed for weeks. That was my necessary failure. I had to go through that to get to the other side.
Yeah.
However, in my mindset is failure is not an option, which means I kept practicing, I kept doing it, I kept getting there,
I
and then I
love that.
successfully performed a Buffalo Shuffle on stage in front of people. I'm now out of my necessary fail period. The mindset of failure is not an option has gotten me through to the other side, and now I have at least one dance that I can successfully pull off.
That's right. It's good. I think going back to like it's okay to fail and going through it, it also builds more courage, right? Like so the more we can communicate and overcome these scary things and find our community, the more credibility we feel like we have and the
Yes.
more we can GSD. So on that note, who has been a part of your community or mentorship or tools that you use to help you get shit done?
Yeah. Um, it's a great question because I think that mentorship and that people that you surround you with are absolutely so important. And over the last, especially maybe the last 2 years, I realized that I am so blessed that I don't know that I could pick one individual person. I am
Yeah.
surrounded by phenomenal people. And I think in fairness to me and in I guess maybe giving hope and inspiration to other entrepreneurs, I have chosen to put those people around me intentionally, and to put myself in places where they are. So yes, I am blessed, but I also made choices not to be, at parties every single Friday and Saturday night. I'm actually at networking events instead,
Yeah.
and so I'm able to do that. There's a couple people that come to mind. One is a collective or a group, and it's the forum that you mentioned. So our entrepreneur organization and the forum. The trust, respect, and the transparency and vulnerability that our group has put together as a group that is a really significant impact, I think, on my life and where I'm at. And so that's a whole collective. Individually, I have a couple different business partners. My personal business partner with Knowledge Perk, Jordan. He's just been a rock and been very steadfast, both from a faith perspective with me and something that I've explored more and more, and also just as the background in our business. I've got another guy, David Stringer. David Stringer is one of the founders of the Gravity Center with me, and we have a couple other companies together. And I hired David Stringer originally as a personal coach. When I was going through just a bunch of stuff several years ago and wanting to figure out how do I make myself a better person and entrepreneur, I found somebody in the community that I respected that was fairly quiet. I watched his ethics and how he built his business.
Mm-hmm.
And he will tell you from a community standpoint, he's never going to be the most popular person. He's not social media out there. He's not this, socialite or somebody like me that's going to be loud and in the middle of the room and obnoxious. He was always in the background, and that's who I wanted. And so I went and asked him if if he'd ever coached before. He had not. I had some conversations on why I felt he was a good fit for me. Sat down and then ended up paying him out of my personal budget to be a coach for me and help hold me accountable in my life. We got to a place where when I started my entrepreneurial journey and I had no money, it was like, look, I love you. Here's the sacrifice that I now have to make. Do you want to be friends instead? And since then, we've become seriously, and it was kind of like that pitiful moment, but I mean, we have become best friends since then. And I've traveled with them, and we have 3 or 4 companies together, and we're on, weekly calls, and now we build each other up and lift each other up. But it started with me intentionally knowing that I needed somebody else to pour into me and being willing to actually pay and take it seriously to have somebody intentionally do that. And it's just completely changed my world.
Yeah, I love that. And also what you said earlier is like putting yourself in the right place. What's the saying, right? If you want to soar, you got to hang out with eagles, not the
Yep.
turkeys. But also going back to like the advice and the mentorship and finding the right people that align with where you want to be to help you get there. I think it's definitely incredibly important and to get there as an entrepreneur. But one of the things I want to touch on, because I think you're amazing at this, is how the heck do you start a business and raise capital when you have no money? Because there are a lot of people out there that want to start a company. Maybe they're terrified, or they don't, and don't know how to take a loan out, or don't know how to get funding for a big idea that they have. Like, can you give us some tips on how you go
Yes.
about that?
That is, I'm so glad you asked. That is probably when I go to like either universities or just in the entrepreneurial circles here in York County, that is the number one question that I get is how do you raise funds? And my answer typically surprises people because I think they think there's like a secret sauce, and there is, but it's not what people think.
Okay.
Raising money and getting funds is 100% about relationships, and it goes back to what you were just talking about putting yourself in the room. I tell people all the time that if you go, and I think you've probably heard this, if you ask somebody for money, you're going to get advice. If you ask somebody for advice, you have a really good chance of getting money.
Oh, I've not heard
Um,
that. Say that
okay,
one
so
more
that's
time.
if you ask somebody for money, chances are you're going to get advice.
Interesting.
If you've built a relationship where you can ask somebody for advice, you have a much better chance of getting money.
Cool.
And so, what I have done is I have really focused on building relationships, and being of value to people when I can, and just being very sincere and authentic in the relationships that I've built.
Hmm.
And that builds trust, it builds credibility. And then I'm able to go and ask them for help and say, hey, I've got this opportunity, I've got this over here. What do you think about this? Who do you know? And there's a very different relationship that's been built because I never intended originally to pitch them for money. And then what's happened is now they're invested in me as a person, which leads them to be invested in my ideas and how I connect and I'm authentic with other people. And then, especially if you've put yourself in the right room with those people typically have a certain amount of influence or they've got personal wealth. Well, if there's an investment in you and you've built a relationship, I think people, for the most part, are kind and good at heart. They want to see, especially in entrepreneurial circles, they want to see other people succeed. And
Yeah.
so I go in with the mentality of not asking for money and not asking for anything for me or for my company, but I truly physically will set my mindsets. When I walk in one of those rooms, it's who can I talk to? Who can I help? Who can I bring value to? And
Yeah.
then the money just follows. I'm so fortunate. I think I have now been either helped to start or been a part of 7 or 8 different companies. I have never once put a penny of my own money in any of them, ever.
That blows my mind, but yes, it's amazing.
It is 100% relationships. It is
Hmm.
how you treat people. I was on a call with my investors last night. This is slightly personal, but it's okay. So I mean, I'm gonna share it because I think it's so important to really have this mindset all the way down to the core if you really want to raise funds, and to be able to raise funds. I've raised anywhere from ten to $20,000 to like right now we're in the middle of $5 million, and I've helped other people do the same thing. But this mindset is something that I will not waver away from, and I think it's the number one tool that I have in my bag to help me go raise funds. We have some investors that invested in one of our entities, one of our companies. Um, we had 5 at the time, and this just happened. We had one that failed. We shut the location down. It was a total epic failure. They lost 90% of their value of their investment. Legally, I have every right, and they know this, and we've had this conversation. I can tell them that we're closing down that into that location. They're not going to get their money back. Basically, my hands are clean and done. We tried, it didn't work. That was the risk of the investment. That happens. I had 4 that were successful, 1 that failed. It's really good odds in our world.
Yeah.
It is what it is, right? Usually it's the other way around.
Hmm.
Instead, I went to my larger group and said, look, here's the plan, and we're going to roll everything together, and we're going to put all this stuff in one big pot. We're changing some things. And in doing so, I'm going to bring in this group of people as well. They're going to go in the same pot as everybody else, and I'm going to give them the value of their original investment. At the numbers that we're talking, it's fairly minuscule. It's not going to hurt anybody one way or another. I still had a couple questions because ethically, I don't have to do that. Legally, I'm certainly not required to do that. And some would say it's unnecessary and setting a precedent. However, for me, my precedent is if I'm going to continue to raise money and I'm going to help other people, my priority has to be the people over the money.
Yeah.
And our culture as a company is such as that we take care of our people.
Mm-hmm.
They did nothing wrong. We did nothing wrong. So there's nobody at fault. So what does it cost me if I spend an extra $100,000 to take care of people that tried to stand by us when we needed it? That will come back in spades. And it's that mentality that has let me secure funds over and over and over again because people know that I will treat their money and them like that. That is
See,
the secret sauce.
well, and that is truly a purpose and a core value thing. Like being a good person, that you guide your principles are guiding you, right? You trust, respect, and taking care of others, and that is incredibly important. And you go back to company culture and talking about taking care of your people. I've often heard CEOs say like, well, that's hand-holdy, fluffy stuff. Culture doesn't matter. And I would argue that, the famous saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yep.
You clearly have demonstrated that taking care of people has resulted in true financial gain, but it wasn't that you were seeking that first, that you were
Correct.
really letting your principles guide you. I love that. And now I have to say, Ryan, and for those that are not in the Charlotte region, Knowledge Perk is a really well-known brand now. Tell us a little bit about how you've secured some of these relationships, that you're on a national stage with Charlotte FC. Like your brand is everywhere, and it started when? In COVID?
Uh, 2018, 6 months before COVID.
Okay, right?
Yeah.
So it's pretty phenomenal where you brought it today. Can you speak? And is that also based on those relationships you're talking about earlier?
It is. So I realized I just misspoke. I think we started in 2018. COVID hit 2020, and we expanded in our first large location in 2019. So we had a year when we were kind of a very small space.
Yeah.
Then we went to the big one, and then it's just happened. And yes, it is 100% based off of that exact same mentality. I cannot overstate how important it is to treat people kindly, to treat people with respect, not to burn bridges. You never know who you're talking to
Yeah,
and the
for
circle of
sure.
influence that they have. So I'll give you one very very specific and very quick story of like what this looks like. And there are some pieces where we were very intentional on our strategy, and we thought ahead, and all of our thoughts and plans and strategy and what we wanted to do would never have come to pass if we didn't have the people with the influence to help make that happen.
Back to being around the Eagles, right?
It,
You got
it
pussies in
is.
the right room.
A
Yep.
1000%. The perfect example, and this is so crazy, but this is a true story. When we first started Knowledge Perk, or we started expanding in 2019, I knew that the Carolina Panthers were coming to town in Rock Hill, South Carolina. So there was all this buzz about the new headquarters and all that kind of stuff. And we have a lot of connections with some other people that we know, and so we knew it was happening. I had this idea because one of the things I do in taking care of people, all of my investors, if you're an investor or a close personal friend of me with Knowledge Perk, then you get a black card. The black card allows you to go into any Knowledge Perk and you can have what you want that day for free.
Why don't I have a black card?
Because I gave out too damn many of them.
Oh, all right then. I just realized, like, wait a second. I thought we
Yes.
were friends, but
We're,
that's okay.
I can get you a black card, Jenny.
Just messing with you.
So we did, and my investors have their name engraved on them. So
Fair.
every
Yes.
one of my employees at every store, doesn't matter where you go, if you're one of my investors, you walk in with this engraved black card, and you can get it. So it's made to make you feel important and great
No,
and
it's
part
awesome.
of our
Yeah.
team. Well, I knew the Panthers were coming, and so I had this crazy idea that I wanted to do stuff with the Panthers and Charlotte FC. So I went and got black cards engraved with David Tepper, with Nicole Tepper, with Marty Herney, with the coach, with like and I researched the top 10 VIPs, and every single one of them got a personalized VIP black card with their name engraved on it. And I kept them in my box, in my truck, waiting for the right moment for almost 2 years.
I did not know this story. I love this.
So so I had this old beat
That is
up
some
piece of
scrappy
truck.
entrepreneurial shit. Like,
It
good
is.
on you.
They literally just sat in the box. Well, I went to an event with Rock Hill Economic Development Corporation here
Okay.
in Rock Hill, and the speaker for the event was Mark Hart. Mark was the chief operating officer for the Carolina Panthers, and prior to that, Mark was the CFO and president of the Steelers for 25 years. So, I mean, literally president of an NFL team and their CFO, flew around with Mr. Rooney, all that stuff, was the chief operating officer. He was the speaker. Well, he happens to like coffee, and so I saw him at the event, and after the event,
Who
he
doesn't
came,
like coffee?
right? He came into Knowledge Perk. And I realized, I said, oh, snap, this is Mark Hart. I actually have a black card with his name on it. So I walked up to him and I introduced myself, and I said, Mr. Hart, you don't know me, but I'm Ryan. I was just at this meeting, and I know who you are. I have a gift for you. Is it okay if I give it to you? And he looked at me like I was crazy.
Yeah,
And
he's
he's like,
probably like, who the hell is this guy?
seriously. And he's like, okay. So I walked out to my truck and I grabbed this little box that had these black cards in it. I came in, I sat down with him at the coffee shop, and I pulled out a black card that has his name on it. And then I set out all the other black cards that had David Tepper, Nicole Tepper, all these people, Marty Herney's names engraved on the black cards, and said, I knew you guys were coming to town. I wanted to give you a welcome. I have intentions of doing things with the Carolina Panthers and Charlotte FC. I'm going to need your help. Here is a gift from me. Let me know when we can sit down and have an opportunity to discuss some things later. I've got some ideas, but I didn't want to do that without offering something. Here's a gift from me to your entire organization.
Damn, that's badass.
And from that point on, he looked at me and he was like, he's like, how long have you had these in your truck? And I started laughing. I said, about 2 years. He just looked and he said, you've had my name engraved on a card for 2 years. And I said, yes, sir, I did.
That's some commitment and some drive. Yeah.
He made a call and literally called somebody right then and there and said, hey, I've been wanting to upgrade coffee. I have someone you need to talk to. There's not going to be a question. This is who you're using. And then set up an introduction. And from there, we started doing more and more stuff. And so that relationship that I started building with him, most people don't know, but after he quit the Carolina Panthers for a period of about 7 months, and the reason that we have made so much progress in the last year is because Mark Hart, that guy that I met that day, became my chief financial officer for Knowledge Perk and worked for me for free for 7 months to redo all of our finances and our structure and help us out because of a relationship that was built that day.
So amazing. And I got to touch on this for a moment too. Is like, I used to assume anyone that was in an entrepreneurial community or ran a business and it was very successful must have gone to Harvard, must have gone to some big Ivy League school, knew people already. It was handed down to them. Tell me how it was not handed to you.
Oh my goodness. Man, you were talking about GSD.
Right? Like, so, I mean, you have a good story. It wasn't like you were just born into an entrepreneurial world.
No, nobody in my family was an entrepreneur. Nobody in my family, with the exception of my grandfather, much later in life, had graduated from college, and he became a preacher and graduated from seminary. I graduated high school super early. I was right at the end of 15. I went to college, but I got expelled, which is a whole other story.
We don't have to get into that, but
yeah, right. But
my point is, yeah,
it wasn't anything like crazy, but it was a very small Christian school. It was intended to get me ready to go for another college because I was so young, where I had a scholarship. And so I didn't do that. And so, I really kind of floundered around for a little while. That's one of the reasons I joined the military. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I worked in, restaurants and retail. My background was Starbucks and Chili's and then Harris Teeter. So, nothing wrong with any of those jobs. Right. I learned a ton at all of them. I learned the value of, work ethic and commitment and people skills. I don't think my trajectory really started to change until I got to Spiffy and entered a sales role and figured out the importance of relationships, because that's what sales is.
Yep.
But, for me, we didn't grow up with money. We didn't grow up with businesses. I grew up working your traditional blue-collar 40, 50-hour a week type of jobs. And just decided that that's not the life that I wanted. I wanted more. And I didn't have necessarily the tools to go get it. I didn't have a college degree. I didn't have a family support structure in the sense that, they also own businesses or anything like that. My family's amazing. And so it was really just up to me and this mindset of, okay, if I'm going to do this, I got a GSD. I got to have the courage to jump off the bridge, and I've got to assume that nobody is there to help me or protect me. It's on me. What do I got to do? And then I started maturing and realizing that that's a little bit of a jaded approach. It worked to get me started, but there are people out there that are willing to help you and support you, but you got to put yourself in that room where they are. And they're willing to do it. So no, it was, I remember growing up in, and not to get crazy, but I remember growing up in a single wide trailer where me and my brother and my sister all shared the same room. My dad had left and my mom was working a job that she could take us to school so that she could still homeschool us. I graduated super early and started working really hard to be able to help her literally pay bills. And the first car that my mom ever bought on her own was a 2000 green Honda Accord. I love that freaking car. She bought it for $5,000 and she didn't have enough credit to get the loan from the bank. She got the $5,000 from me at 16 years old and made car payments to me. because I was working so much that I could pay for the car.
Man.
And so she bought her first car for me. So like that is how I grew up with like what we had to do to take care of ourselves and our family. And so there was no, silver spoon type of mentality. And I think that's one of the reasons that like I operate now to build companies and help people with no money. I never had any.
Yeah,
So
you're paying that forward for sure.
there is a bit of that. And there's also like you just learn how to operate when you don't have it. Then, you got to get shit done anyway. So how do you?
Yeah, and especially when we go through these downturns like COVID and other things when we have to be innovative, I think that's the most get shit done moments because we have to figure that out.
100%.
Excuse me.
Those are the moments where failure is not an option. Like,
Correct.
You just got to go.
I'm going to take 1 second.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, so we know that in those downturn moments, failure is not an option. You got to get shit done. It wasn't just handed to you. Work super hard. So if you had to take all of that, what's one piece of advice you could give our listeners who are scared to take that jump or maybe aren't sure how to just like get started?
That's a great question. I mean, so many things come to mind. But I think if I go back to my personal experience, there's any number of decisions that I made along the way that I could tell people would be great advice for them to duplicate for themselves. And yet I think it goes kind of back to what we've been talking about. The single best thing that you can do, the single best chance that you have for success and for having the courage to just jump, whether you have the parachute or not, is to surround yourself with the people that emulate the attitude that you want to have the courage to also emulate. Again, if you're not in that room, if you're not willing to do something as simple as surround yourself with those people, which requires no decision, no action, no commitment, requires no money, there's no risk. There's no risk involved with putting yourself in a room of other people who are already successful and who are already, at least in your mind, accomplishing the same things that you want to. That's as risk-free an environment as you can have. If you are willing to do that, then you can start building those relationships. They can encourage you, and I think eventually you can get to the place where you have the courage to do that. But you've got to at least be willing to put yourself in that room and surround yourself with those people. Every decision that I have made has had a little bit of either advice or I have watched somebody else in the decisions that they have made. And I think that I've been fortunate to make better decisions than the average person coming from the same kind of similar background. Not because I was any smarter or any different, but because I'd put myself in places to watch people who were at a different caliber, who were more successful. And I emulated what they did and their thought process. And it's opened more and more doors for me and helped me grow and mature.
Yeah, you had a growth mindset. You were courageous to get in the room. And if you don't ask, the answer is always no, right? So you were willing to ask. So I love that. So one last question, because this is just for fun. Everyone has a hype song, right? Yes. And it's a song that empowers them, motivates them. We have a playlist, a GSD playlist. So what song should I add to that playlist, Ryan? What's your...
It's so easy. Believer by Imagine Dragons.
Nice. All right.
I love that song. Love that song. Fired up and tired of the way things have been. I'm the master of my sales. Oh my God, I love that song.
Yeah,
I love that song.
Yeah, I dig it. Yep. All right, very good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Ryan. It was a really good conversation. And I even learned something new, even after knowing you for a while. I think those cards are a badass way of getting in the door and just thinking creatively on your feet to make connections. So I love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny, for having me. It was a great conversation, and I appreciated the opportunity to share a little bit with others.
Thanks for listening to GSD with Jenny. If you found this episode helpful, share it with a friend. For more ways to GSD, you can also find me on LinkedIn at Jenny Buchholz, where you can sign up for my Maven Mindset newsletter, or follow me on Instagram at Maven Jenny. Until next time, go GSD, Mavens!